Welcome in the suburb of London. So we have the city of London this way, and then on the east side we have Canary Wharf. A lot of good souvenir. Today I want to talk about the big lie, and I want to talk about why we ended up measuring marketing in the way we are. And I'll start with an anecdote. A couple of years ago, I heard a chief revenue officer of several hundred billions tech company saying all buyer journey start with a Google search. And at first I was really shocked how confident a person of that seniority can say something that wrong. I took a good year to understand how did we ended up there. And what I found out is that the chief revenue officer was not just somebody who didn't understand. A lot of executives in a lot of companies have been misled for decades by attribution vendors and channel in the way you have to measure marketing. And there are a lot of dangerous myths that can lead to very painful losses. If you can't track it, it didn't happen. All buyer journey starts with a Google search. We just need more leads. We don't have the time to invest in brands. We track our buyer journey with multi-touch attribution. All of those myths leads to considerable losses every day. And I see companies over and over doing the same mistakes. Have you noticed how difficult today it is to find a job? You have 5,000 applications for one single open position. And the key element here to be on the top of the pile is personal branding. And selling a service or product, it's not different. You have to be on the top of mind of people to be selected. And that's what a lot of those attribution tools measure their marketing impact is misleading, because it's all on the bottom of the funnel and nothing really to find out how we can end up of the top of the pile. Also, people really rely way more on network. They're going to ask their peers what they like. They're going to go on Reddit. They're going to go on YouTube. They're going to watch videos about the best and the negatives of all different products. They really less rely on Google Ads, for example, non-brand searches that we're going to cover a bit later to understand what is the right product for them. And so what is very important too that I will deep dive into a bit later is that 80% of buyers buy a brand they already know before starting their buyer journey. So actually, very few buyer journeys start with a Google search. Another very dangerous myth with attribution is that what is selling is the why. It's not the how. It doesn't matter how many impressions the person has seen, or if it came from Google search, from LinkedIn. When you sell a high ticket, it doesn't matter which door to use to come to you. What matters and what sells is the why. And attribution is not capable to track that. And because of that, when you use BI tools or attribution tools, what's ending up happening is that you focus on the wrong things and you're actually killing your growth. A very interesting case about this is an attribution company. But if you look at what the CEO has posted recently, they say that networking is working well. They do a lot of videos, they do a lot of OH. And then it turns out that you have the CRO of an attribution company actually finding out that what's working the best is what is not trackable. So it's a bit of the do what I say, not what I do, a situation where, in fact, if even an attribution company does that, maybe you should also reconsider how much emphasis you put on attribution. What is very important is, as I explained, mental availability, brand. Being on the top of the pile when somebody starts to search for you. In fact, in B2B, we say that about 5% of your ICP is in market at any given time. And 80% of that 5% is going to pick a brand they already know before they started their buyer journey. That means that if you're really not focusing on brand and you really focus on brand search, for example, which a lot of companies do, I see companies spending 50% of the entire budget on Google non-brand and competitor brand. What's happening is that you're really fighting for that 1% who's going to pick a brand they didn't know before. And so your entire 50% of your budget goes into that 1% of ICP to convert. Financially, it's not viable. Brand is just not a nice to have. It's about building that credibility that get that seat on the table. I agree with you. We should understand what is the impact of brand, but there are many ways to understand it without the reliance on tracking, and we'll cover that later. Another thing I want to say is that performance marketing harvests demand that is already created. In 80% of the case, it's going to be a brand that the buyers know already. In 20% of the case, it's not. But the reality is that if you focus on harvesting only and not on seeding, you have a very ineffective go-to-market. The other thing is too, is that I don't completely like the concept of harvesting, because in fact, there's a lot of demand that you don't even need to harvest because they're going to come to you. And because we want to fit our marketing performance into attribution tool, into BIs, we spend a lot of money on brand search, retargeting to really try to get the claim on that demand that would have come to you anyway. And the impact of that is that it's going to increase your customer acquisition cost and therefore reduce your margin. So let's go back to the performance marketing trap. As I said, only 1% on the ICP market today will pick a brand they don't know. So should you focus on that? The answer is obviously no if you want to scale. And I see a lot of companies spending 50% of the entire budget on non-brand search, which is completely ineffective. And the thing is, because all companies does it, you have your CPC that is going, your cost per click that is super high, your cost per conversion, which is super high, because you all have those companies fighting and competing against each other for Google benefits, raising the bids for that little 1% that's going to pick a brand they don't know already. And so you really have to get away from this and really start to invest in your upper funnel, build mental availability, build credibility, so people think about it and you're not relying on those algo bidding where everybody spend all of their money and end up to be a channel which is highly ineffective. Another findings I saw, which was quite interesting for non-brand search, is that when you look at self-attribution from leads coming from some brand search, you have half of them that does not mention internet searches. They heard about the brands elsewhere. And I find it super interesting because even if it's non-brand search, actually, there's a part where it's actually not that incremental because the people know you already. A very big important piece of information is that when I started to work with sales notes, I saw that in 75% of the time about that, what the buyers were telling the sales team was different than what the MTA was suggesting. And the problem is that it creates a big misalignment between sales and marketing, which goes against completely what MTA vendor says, like, oh, we're going to show all the touch points and then sales will be able to see what marketing has contributed to. But in reality, it's not the case. We go back with a lot of touch points, explaining the sales team why we contributed to that deal, while actually the sales team have heard a completely different stories from the client. Another reality is that one, knowledge graph have very big difficulties to stitch the touch point together. It's not effective. Cross-device, cross-platform, it's really difficult to get that information together. And the result of that is that there's a lot of touch point that's going to be disregarded because we're not capable to join them. And even if in the best case you're capable to put all of those touch points together, the reality is that there's a lot of touch points that are not trackable. And so, for example, what you're going to have is that you're going to have a person who already has 4 competitors in mind. When I was working at a big B2B company, what I see is that from the sales note again, you could see that it was always the same competitors popping up. And so a lot of people start with already competitors in mind. And then they go on Google on a non-brand search to get some comparison. And then your Google campaign is going to have a contribution to that, which is questionable because they didn't really learn about the company. Because a user went on the website visit, we're going to have a lot of like dozens of LinkedIn impression because we are retargeting visitors. And we're going to say, hey, it's because of all of those LinkedIn visitors that we had the deal. But on the other side, we had the sales team going with a client for dinners. You have the client who went to some webinars, to some events, and all of this is completely disregarded. And that's the real problem, is that we disregard what's really create the connection, because it is, as the CEO of says, it is connections that close deals, and connections are not trackable. So why do smart leaders fall for it? A few reasons. First is because they fall into that myth that have been sold to them for decades. Another thing about attribution is that when people start to click less on ads, instead of questioning the model, you have a lot of vendors who say, no worries, hold my beer, we're going to track impression. And that is a very funny part because there's so many questionable things about impression. I mentioned it, for example, you retarget website visitor, but it doesn't mean that it had really any impact. I can literally post a blank page as an ad and start to get credit from it. If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is a red flag. So why do leaders fall for it? Because they fall for it because we sold them it's just an easy thing. Oh, we will be able to track what the marketing does for sales. It's all going to fit in a dashboard. But the thing is, when a CEO comes to you and say, hey, why does the competitor has a seat on the table, not us? The answer to that is because you ask us to create lead and marketing attributed pipeline. Because the people who do not focus on those MTA tools, who are building brand and building mental availability, are the ones who get a seat on the table, not the ones tracking leads and attributed marketing. A single source of truth is also a fake solution. When you think about it, your campaigns on the bottom of the funnel, from where people convert, are always going to look better than the one on the top of the funnel. Because on the top of the funnel, people don't convert. They get awareness, they get brand credibility, and then they come to your channel organically, or they come to your channel and then they convert. So if you look at the source of truth and you look at leads per campaign all across the board, of course your brand search campaign and your retargeting is going to look better than the other one. But the thing is, you can't look at them in the same way. You have to evaluate the top of your funnel in a very different way. What is the benefits of a brand building and mental availability? Higher margin. As I explained to you with the Google ad example, if people come to you directly and you don't need to have Google search to bid on them, you're out of that non-brand, very high competition situation on Google and on LinkedIn. Also, you're less sensitive to price. You're not fighting on price anymore. If you have a very strong brand and people are really convinced that you're the one who's going to solve their problem, you are way more flexible on price. People are willing to pay the premium if they're really convinced that you're the one who's going to solve the problem. You also have shorter sales cycles and higher sales conversion rate. And that's super important, is because that brand credibility is not only going to impact the performance of marketing, it's also going to impact all your outbound initiatives. Because if you call someone to sell a product and that person already knows you, it's much easier to sell than if the person never heard about you. It's a bit like when somebody calls you a cold outbound on the phone, for example. Personally, I'm absolutely not receptive when I get called by somebody I absolutely have no idea where it's coming from. Also, when you have people talking about you, for example, you call someone and then that person's going to call somebody else that he knows use the product, and that person says, oh, the product is amazing. All of this is helping. This is your brand credibility. This is people feedback. That is what's selling. So how do we get out of this? Well, first, you have to rethink what's working and what's not. The reality is you have to focus on the why, not the how. Attribution, all of those kind of measurement, it doesn't tell you why the people are buying. And that's my second point, is that you have to understand why your buyers are buying. If you have a sales team, talk to them. They'll be able to know you exactly why people are buying, why they're not buying. If you don't have a sales team, do post interviews, whether it's a win, whether it's a loss. Have interviews, try to understand what drove the person to you beforehand, what was the worries, etc., etc. The third thing you have to do is ensure that your bottom of the funnel is incremental. Retargeting, paid brand search is always the two channels I would look at where I know there's a lot of money to be saved. The third one is Google brand search. There is a lot. What I figured out is that while it's an incremental channel, you have diminishing return. Why? Because only 1% of your ICP who's in market right now is willing to buy a brand they don't know already. And start to look for metrics that matters. What does matter to a business? Brand search, GTM effectiveness, sales cycles, win rate, deal size, growth rate, CAC payback. All of those are the metrics you have to look at. And yes, they're not trackable metrics, but you can actually link those marketing to those metrics. For example, if you look at your revenue divided by spend, which gives you like an idea of your marketing effectiveness, and you turn off brand search, you could, for example, see that you have improved the CAC because the revenue is still coming in and you have less spend. You can start to turn off retargeting, do some experiment, and then you can see that again, you have improved the CAC again. You can start to turn down brand search, and then you can start to see the improvement of CAC. And those metrics actually you come by very quickly. I agree with you, the difficulty is when you push the money elsewhere on the top of the funnel, it takes more time. But you do have metrics like brand search, share of voice, sales data. There are metrics that's going to help to measure the impact of your initiative on the top of the funnel. What is not completely true is that brand is only long-term. You can see some brand initiative impacting the demand very quickly. Obviously, yes, it's going to be a bit smoother because you're not targeting only the ICP that is in market right now. You're targeting the one that are today, but in a week or so, in a month. So yeah, it's a bit flattened, but there are a lot of ways you can use to track your brand credibility and your mental availability. Last but not least, you will have to dump at some point the idea that you can take business decision based on MTAs or BI dashboards. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. There is a lot of things that a BI dashboard will never going to be able to tell you, which is the concept of diminishing return, for example, which is the concept of the fact that upper funnel campaign should be measured differently than the bottom of the one. And so you're never going to have a single source of truth. That is not possible. But the thing is, the good news is that if you start with the first 4 points, and then, because I know that a lot of you is going to be worried, like, well, dumping our MTA on our BI tools, yeah, that is crazy. I agree. I don't think it is, but I would understand why you're worried. But the thing is, when you start to do the first 4 points I mentioned, which are rethink what is really working, really understand why the buyers are buying, ensure that your bottom of the funnel is incremental, look for metrics that really matters, you are going to understand that there is a clear disconnect between what really matters and your MTA and BI tool. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I see you later. Bye.